It started with a glance, a subtle, dismissive flick of the eyes that Beatrice had grown used to her entire life. She stood near the grand staircase of Whitmore Manor, clutching a silver tray, her dark skin framed by the starched white of her uniform. Around her, the buzz of laughter, the clink of champagne glasses, and the swirl of silk gowns filled the opulent room. But not a single person looked at her as an equal. "Careful with that," murmured a woman in a red satin dress, not looking up as she passed by. Her tone dripped with a practiced sweetness that barely masked the contempt underneath. Beatrice didn't respond. She never did. In Whitmore Manor, silence had always been her armor. She'd been working for the Whitmores for nearly 5 years. Hired as a housekeeper, promoted to house coordinator. A fancy title that meant she did everything and received credit for none of it. Tonight, however, was different. Tonight, Edward Whitmore, the family's only son, was bringing home his fiancée. And the guest list? A who's who of Belford's elite, most of whom had never set foot in this manor unless it involved champagne, scandal, or both. Beatrice had spent weeks preparing for the engagement party, choosing the linens, supervising the florists, directing the kitchen staff. And yet, when guests arrived, they looked right through her, as if she were part of the wallpaper. Or worse, an intruder. She moved through the room with the grace of someone used to disappearing. That was the trick, after all. Be invisible, be quiet, and never give them a reason to notice. That is, until she overheard them. 2 older women stood near the grand piano, sipping white wine and whispering behind lacquered nails. "Did you see her? The girl Edward brought. Pretty enough, I suppose. But I thought the Whitmores had standards." "Exactly. Her hair's too wild. And her complexion. Well, let's just say it doesn't scream old money." Beatrice's stomach twisted. She knew who they were talking about. Lila, Edward's fiancée. She was new to Belford, with a sweet laugh and a sharp wit. She also happened to be biracial. And in Belford, that was enough to set the gossip mill ablaze. She tried to walk away, but one of the women suddenly noticed her. "You there," the lady said, motioning toward Beatrice with her glass. "Tell the chef the crab cakes are cold. And bring another bottle of Chardonnay." Beatrice gave a tight nod and turned away, swallowing her pride. She had heard worse in this house, but it never got easier. In the kitchen, she leaned against the counter for a moment, exhaling slowly. Margaret Whitmore, Edward's mother, bustled in moments later. "Beatrice, darling, we're short 2 place settings in the west dining room. See to it, will you?" Beatrice hesitated. "Mrs. Whitmore, the table was set exactly as you requested." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Then I suggest you check again." There it was, that clipped tone, the undercurrent of accusation. It wasn't about the plates. It never was. It was about control, superiority, reminding Beatrice of her place. Still, she nodded again and left the kitchen. As she moved through the hallway, she caught sight of herself in one of the gilded mirrors. Her eyes, always calm, now burned with quiet fury. What angered her wasn't just the whispered racism or the veiled insults. It was the fact that the same people who looked down on her would never survive a day doing what she did. They relied on her, needed her, but they would never respect her. Back in the dining room, she noticed something strange. 2 extra name cards had been added, both with elegant calligraphy, but in handwriting she didn't recognize. She picked one up, Mr. Samuel Green. She frowned. That name wasn't on the guest list. Just then, Edward entered with Lila on his arm. Beatrice had only met her once, but Lila offered her a smile, a real one, not the kind people wore when they wanted to seem polite. Beatrice smiled back. A small gesture, but it lit something inside her. As the guests gathered, Margaret made a grand speech, lifting her glass with rehearsed grace. "To Edward and Lila," she said, "may your union be as noble as your heritage." Beatrice noticed the pause, barely a second, but it was there. The word heritage hung in the air like a warning. Lila's smile faltered, just slightly. Later, as the party wore on and the champagne flowed, Beatrice found herself outside on the back terrace. The stars above the manor twinkled like secrets. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the cold settle in her bones. Lila joined her minutes later. "Some night," she said softly. Beatrice nodded. They're not all like that. Lila looked at her. No, but enough of them are. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. You handled it well, Beatrice said. Lila gave a tired smile. So did you? They stood there for a while, two women from different worlds, bound by shared experience. But neither of them knew that someone had been watching them from the shadows. Someone who didn't like how easily they connected. Someone who would make sure that night wasn't forgotten. Not by Belford, not by the Whitmores, and especially not by Beatrice. Beatrice Sinclair had always been used to getting what she wanted. A lifetime spent in privileged circles had led her to believe that wealth, family legacy, and status were the true markers of a person's worth. When she arrived at the Gilded Spoon for her wedding tasting, she had every intention of keeping the event flawless. Her vision of perfection was so rigid that it left no room for anything or anyone who didn't fit her exacting standards. Charles, her fiancé, had long ago learned to stay quiet when she was in one of her moods. He could practically hear the gears in her mind turning, preparing her next critique. His fingers tapped nervously on his phone as Beatrice dismissed every detail of the venue, from the staff's attire to the floral arrangements. His attempts to redirect her focus were ignored. The arrival of Eleanor Vance, the head of the catering team, didn't exactly help the situation. Eleanor, an older black woman with silver-streaked hair and a calm demeanor, entered with a tray of carefully prepared pastries. Beatrice's sharp eyes took in every detail of her appearance. Her plain white uniform, the faint lines of age in her face, and immediately her judgmental nature flared. Olivia, Beatrice called sharply, her voice like ice. Is this the woman who is supposed to be handling the food? Yes, ma'am. Olivia, the event coordinator, replied. This is Ms. Vance. She's the head chef here. Beatrice raised an eyebrow. The chef. Her lips twisted in disdain. Well, I certainly expected someone more fitting for the occasion. Charles, ever the passive observer, sighed inwardly, already dreading the upcoming exchange. He was well aware of Beatrice's tendency to dehumanize people, especially those she perceived as below her. And as much as he tried to turn a blind eye, it was getting harder to ignore. Eleanor, unfazed by the scrutiny, set the tray of pecan pralines on the table with grace. She spoke softly, offering them to Beatrice. I hope you enjoy these. They're made with a touch of bourbon. Beatrice barely glanced at the pastries, but her cold gaze stayed firmly on Eleanor. I'd like to know who will be handling the cake, she said, her tone dismissive. If it's her again, I'll walk out. Charles, who had been fiddling with his phone, finally spoke up, though his voice was weak. Beatrice, maybe we should just try the food. We're here to taste it, not critique it. But Beatrice was already in full swing, her disdain for Eleanor growing with each passing second. She didn't even bother to try a single praline, instead choosing to continue her tirade about the venue's supposed inadequacies. This place is fine for a small event, but it's clearly too beneath the level of what I had in mind. Eleanor stood a few feet away, quiet and poised, letting the comments roll off her back. Her years of experience had taught her to be patient, to give clients like Beatrice room to air their grievances. But something in the air was shifting, something Eleanor could feel deep down. As Olivia suggested a change of course, bringing out a new tray of savory appetizers. Beatrice's criticism only grew sharper. These lobster rolls taste like something from a roadside diner, she sneered. This isn't fine dining. This is a joke. Eleanor, having silently overheard Beatrice's rant, decided it was time to speak up. She approached the table, her voice steady but carrying an unspoken authority. With all due respect, Mrs. Sinclair, she began, I have worked in kitchens that have catered galas at the Waldorf Astoria, White House events, and weddings of the highest caliber. This is what I do. This is my art. If there's something specific you would like to change, I am more than willing to accommodate. Beatrice's face flushed with indignation. I'm not paying for someone like you to pretend to be a chef, she spat. I want someone who looks the part. I want someone who knows how to present themselves, not someone who probably scrubs floors when they're not in the kitchen. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Even Olivia seemed to shrink back under the weight of Beatrice's words. But Eleanor, still composed, stood her ground. "You may not understand my worth," Eleanor said, her voice calm but unyielding, "but that doesn't make it any less valuable." Charles, his patience finally at its limit, looked up, his gaze meeting Beatrice's. "Beatrice, enough," he said, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "You're embarrassing yourself. This isn't how you should be treating people." Beatrice stared at him, her lips curling into a tight, defiant smile. "I'm doing what needs to be done," she said, though her conviction wavered under the weight of Charles's gaze. Olivia stepped in, trying to regain control of the situation. "Mrs. Sinclair, we can offer you another tasting or adjust the menu. I assure you, we're committed to making your event perfect." Beatrice huffed, but the edge in her voice had dulled. "Fine," she muttered, "but don't let me see her again. I won't be part of any event where she's involved." As the tension in the room simmered, Eleanor turned and left, her dignity intact. Beatrice sat back in her chair, smugly satisfied, but the words she had spoken, those words of contempt, hung in the air like an unpleasant aftertaste. Outside, the clouds darkened, and for the first time that afternoon, Beatrice felt an unsettling chill creep over her. The Gilded Spoon, the venue she had considered beneath her, suddenly seemed like a place that might be too grand for her arrogance. She glanced at Charles, who was staring at the pastries once more, his silence speaking volumes. "You're right," she muttered under her breath, though whether she was speaking to Charles or to herself, no one could tell. The tasting continued, but Beatrice's sense of control had already begun to slip. The carefully curated world she had built around herself, where she was always the one in power, was starting to crack. And no amount of designer heels or elite status could hide the cracks for much longer.